What's up, everybody? Colby up here from TrainHeroic at the 2017 NSCA Coaches Conference. We want to center our discussion today around performance standards, testing, goal setting, and we'll kind of see where it goes from there. So we're joined by a couple world-class coaches here.
First off, Jeff Nichols, former Navy SEAL and exercise physiologist. Ron McKeefery, former head strength and conditioning coach at Eastern Michigan University and current VP of Performance and Education at Plae Flooring. Scott Caulfield, head strength and conditioning coach for the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And John Garrish, director of athletic development at North Broward Prepatory School.
We got 4 different perspectives, obviously from the private sector, collegiate, high school, certifying body, bunch of different approaches, bunch of different ways. So we just wanted to kind of dive in and share some of that. So Coach Mack, talk to us a little bit about the importance of testing, just broad sense. Why is it important? How often do you do it? And how could a coach who's never actually done any sort of testing kind of kick that stuff off?
Ultimately, testing is a way to hold yourself accountable to evaluating if you're doing what you say you're doing. And as a coach, ultimately, that's our job, is to produce results. And if you start with the question of, does this test help us out on the field, or is this going to make us better on Saturdays, then ultimately that's what you want to try to accomplish in the weight room each and every day. That's why you go to work. I'm in the business of making better football players, and I'm not in the business of making better weightlifters necessarily, or Olympic lifters or whatever. We have to produce results on the field, and developing the components of athleticism ultimately contribute to that in some shape or fashion. And so I do it in a way to hold myself accountable, to see if what I'm prescribing from a protocol standpoint is actually producing the results that I think that they will, and then manipulating that manipulating my training to address the needs of our team.
Jeff, tell us a little bit about your testing protocol, when you do it, why you do it.
It's an assessment. It's a huge assessment tool as a practitioner, first and foremost. If you are constantly testing your people, you're not only just looking at metrics of measurement, you're also seeing how people move, right? And then when you retest them, as you should be retesting them as well, you not only see an improvement in the metrics, but you're going to see, if you've done your protocol right and your training right, you're going to see better movement mechanics. And so I think that's hugely important for us, not just because it keeps me in check, but you get to a point in athletics where the people that you're coaching and teaching are going to go, well, why are we doing this? If you don't have a point of assessment, right, and a point of improvement, just like a doctor's office, you go in, get your assessment, and based off of that, they're going to prescribe. Right? It's no different. Certainly we're not a medical facility, but that keeps us honest, and it will continue to answer the questions of why we're doing it, because you're going to see the results.
And we have a unique setting too, because we have high school athletes, we have tactical athletes, a lot of police officers and firefighters, and we have college athletes. So it's similar to where you have a lot of different teams or whatever. We're doing a lot of different testing, and those tests, we do a lot of the same performance tests. But a lot of our other testing are very different depending on that person's job, that person's whatever they need to play for their sport.
Most of our testing actually occurs outside the weight room. A lot of our programming and progression inside the weight room is autoregulative, working with developmental athletes, meeting their training stress and appropriating that with their readiness on a daily basis. So a lot is determined on how they feel in any given day. And that varies every day. So in order for us to come in and say this is going to be our testing day, a lot of our progression is going to be determined on how they performed in that moment.
Right.
And I think everyone standing around this table has a very experienced training age. Some of our testing days might go as planned. We might get a young high school athlete that percentages are just out of this world, different from what we would expect from them on a different day. So a lot of what we do, we use the APRE system, and we know where they're at on a daily basis. We do modify it in ways and gear it towards our athletes so that we can meet where they're at. But as far as actually in the weight room testing days, we actually avoid those days and progress in that manner.
Testing, you need to have some specific standards or some specific tests that you use to measure the components of athleticism, like I mentioned, but something shouldn't be in your program unless it's there for an intended purpose. Somebody joked or said that we're testing something every single day or every single exercise. It's the truth, and if you're evaluating and you're recording that data, ultimately that's giving you information every single day that should be, if you're a skilled practitioner, should be manipulating your prescription each and every day. And I think I think we did a very good job of addressing the professional answer to that question. The sexy answer is that it is a tool for motivation as well. You know, people want to know if they're getting better, you know, and so by having testing periods, you keep your athletes engaged, and you keep a carrot out in front of them of saying, we're doing this so that we can improve in the short term, but we all know that the short term leads to the long term. When you're in February in Michigan or wherever, the season that seems like a long time away, but if I can motivate you for January for February testing, well, that gets me one step closer, you know, and that's an important piece of the pie when it comes to testing as well.
When it comes to actual, like the day of testing, if you choose to do testing, do you make a big deal of it? Do you hype it up? Is it a big thing? I've seen videos of some schools, Ball State, I think, they dress up in crazy ass costumes. Guys are going nuts, crazy energy. Is there any value to that? And on the flip side, is there any value to just another day?
I'm trying to reach my athletes more from a point of education and feel out, because maybe the athletes don't respond to that at all either. So again, it goes in the assessment phase. Like it's when I'm testing them, I'm also assessing what sort of character I'm dealing with.
With the environment being what's accepted in that sport or with that specific group of athletes, that position group, whatever it may be. But in testing days, do we get a little bit more hype? Absolutely, because this guy is giving me what it should be his very, very best attempt ever, you know, at a specific weight or a specific exercise, whatever it may be. And whenever somebody's going to give me their best, there better be some energy and there better be some enthusiasm. And you know, if you just get under the bar and you have a zero mentality towards trying to accomplish a task, then you're going to fail every single time. And so whether that be lifting a weight, or that's going out on the field and a specific play, or that's doing something in life, whenever you're giving your very best attempt, I expect there to be a certain enthusiasm and intensity, that an approach towards that as well. And I think that, you know, you can foster that early on with energy, you know, external energy, but that needs to progress to that intrinsic motivation later on. The Ball State strength coach, I know exactly the same video, and that's a former intern of mine. And I think, you know, there's a lot of people that'll look at like Scott Cochran and some other strength coaches that are really high energy guys and chalk it up to that's all they have maybe. I mean, taking a frame shot of a program, you can never get the whole deal. And there's, I mean, have I jumped up and down and screamed and yelled? Absolutely. Have I been the complete opposite? Absolutely. I mean, as strength coaches, we need to stop pointing at each other and saying, I would never do this or that or the other, because you never know in the context of that. That's maybe what they needed in that exact moment for that exact team, for where they were at in the program. You know, and at the end of the day, I'll do it if it means wearing a pink leotard. If it's going to get my guys to win
Might be pushing a little bit, but yeah.
I'll wear a pink leotard.
The SWAT team that we work with, their job depends on that test. And it's not just something that they test performance standards with us when they train with us. This is their test that they do for their job every 6 months. So that guys actually get anxiety sometimes about these testing, like when we start building up to it. Our atmosphere changes a little. It's not crazy hype jumping up and down, but all the coaches are on the floor for that day. So it's a little bit, there's definitely more of an intensity to it.
For us, it becomes, yes, in the day it is huge for us, but you almost have to, you certainly have to earn the right to advance in our developmental stages. And when you get into virtually what our goal developmental stage, and that's kind of our elite group, the main component that separates them from the rest is trust. So I trust them on a given day to tell me I'm feeling it and I just crushed this triple that was supposed to be a challenge. And then we can go in and incorporate some bonus sets or something of that nature that really does become an opportunity for them to advance past what they thought they were capable of doing and maybe hit a new PR or something like that. But again, it doesn't necessarily take the place of a true testing day. But the motivation of advancing through the developmental stages, and even the motivation that you'll see from a movement context and from learning the movements and understanding that if I become very successful and efficient at my squat pattern, one day I'm going to be like that guy that coach told he can get after it on maybe one of our last days of the summer. Sometimes the young athletes will have a redundant feel. Why am I bodyweight squatting through this month window or something of that nature? They see the end picture and they see that trust component, and they know that there is going to be opportunities for them to push some heavy weight. It's going to take a little bit different of a place.
We want big numbers, and we want the sexiness of what we see, but the truth is that it's super unsexy, that process typically. It yields that benefit. I've been fortunate enough to see behind the curtains of like the combine, and for a lot of those organizations, the test is the test, but they're just seeing if these people prepared themselves for that, because that's a point of character.
Right. Obviously, being professionals at the high school and all these different avenues, there's a certain amount of standards that are created to have the ability to go test, or the right oversight and supervision to be able to perform the test correctly. And there's enough of a trust factor for you to be able to shut down a lift when technique breaks down. And I think that's really when testing gets a bad name, ultimately because there's people that aren't maintaining that high level of standards with technique or trust or some of the things that we've mentioned.
So we covered the why. Why do we test? Why is it important? Let's get into, I guess, more tactical of like the how, right? So obviously, end of the season, do some testing then. You guys talk me through each of your processes here when it comes to, let's use football as an example. That's the one everybody can relate to.
My first goal after season is to make sure that they're ready to even train. I'm going to really try to keep them out of my space even to get them healthy. Right now it's kind of the off season. I'll get my athletes in, and if we've had them before, we already have a baseline test in and a baseline test out. And I do like to retest them on the same. We use 4 tests. Got to be easily reproduced, right? It's got to be valid, all those sort of things. So we use vertical, broad. We do an upper body med ball test, and we do a modified 3-cone drill, right? And like I said, if we had them preseason the year before and then postseason, and they come to do a long season, they test. A lot of them are expecting them to be better, the numbers to be better. But they're like, well, wow, like my vertical has dropped. And then that is a great point for us to go, look, that's what a season does to you. That's why you need to have time off. Once you've trained them year after year and you get them back in, their assimilation back into that program is real quick. Like if you had them for the first time, it's going to take a couple weeks to get that adaptation. And then you got that upswing. And then by that time, they're into the season. Well, now that upswing happens much quicker typically, if they're healthy.
College football, we test 3 times a year. We'll test at the end of each training period. So at the end of winter, at the end of summer, and at the end of our end season, which is our longest training period. And people forget that, that is most uninterrupted training period that you're going to have. Now, it doesn't come without a lack of tons of stresses and things that affect your results, but it's an important tool to be able to do the goal setting process, which I think is the first step in the testing process, is setting a realistic goal for where they're at and measuring that versus standards that you've created for them to reach. And so for us, it starts with an individual meeting with me, which as the head strength coach, and I'll have my staff members sit in on that meeting. But it's a one-on-one session of us talking about what they need to accomplish. I think it's so important to me because it's twofold. One, you have the human element. I can scream and yell all I want, but if it's a great book made, Switch by Chip and Dan Heath, and it talks about the rational and the conscious mind and the emotional mind, and it's the elephant with the guy riding the elephant, and so the guy on the top is the rational, and then you got the elephant's the emotion.
Yeah.
You're not going to control the elephant if the emotions, unless you can really get that be a part of the process. And so we sit down and we talk about the rational part and get them to understand that we care about them more as people first, and then athletes. And so we have a process that we go through to really get them to understand that we are investing in them, so that I can go out and if I scream and yell, they know where that's coming from. Then we set specific goals, obtainable goals, both short-term and long-term, based off where they're at versus the standard for the sport. So for football, we use the NFL Combine statistic numbers plus some things that we felt like we needed to add in for our own program. So we test a 1-rep bench and a 1-rep squat because we'll program off those numbers, and we do some other anthropometric type tests. But I think it's important that you define good. You have to define good to your athletes, and good for a college football player is these numbers that have been set by the NFL Combine. If it's volleyball, it's whatever USA Volleyball's numbers are. Or military, it's whatever those qualification tests are. Then you add what's missing. So if there's something missing for muscular endurance or muscular power or muscular strength, you add those tests in so that you become a complete program.
We have a lot of data too that Boyd collected at Nebraska over his career there, and so we have all that data that we can compare it to. So we tend to do the 10-yard sprint, vertical jump, and long jump, because again we can measure apples to apples, and pro agility, 5-10-5. We can compare them, they can see them. We have age ranges on those too. There was a lot of data collected, so that's easy for us to show them where they're falling in there. Typically same time that you guys are talking about, beginning season, or I should say beginning of training block, end of training block. One thing that we have gotten away from is testing at the end of the season, and the reason being is some of the sport coaches that we've dealt with, and this is different sports too, not necessarily only football, don't want to train towards the end of the season, and so the sport coach will peel that back, and so now these kids might not have trained for a month, and so this is a battle that I had to kind of educate them on. Is like, okay, well, we can't test now because these guys haven't trained for an entire month. They've just been playing whatever sport. After they've had a break, then it's coming back in. It's another testing at the beginning. Like I said, again, going back to my SWAT reference, those are standards that are set 100, 90, 80. They have to get at least 80. So it's not like another sports setting where, hey, whatever you get is whatever you get. Yeah, it's like you have to get 6 pull-ups with a 40-pound weight vest on to pass, minimum.
Sport coaches tend to get frustrated when they see, you talk all season about, and actually our football coach is really good about making sure they commit to the weight room in season. And then you get out of season and it's like, all right, it's time to commit to the weight room. So they expect to see, everybody crushing it. So to go into kind of a reset and a step back in what we call our technical adaptation phase and try to get them ready for what's to come in the spring. I think I probably described in defense of the no testing how we go about our progression and how we go about monitoring where the athletes are at on a daily basis, weekly basis for sure. A lot of our testing batteries, what's going to take place, being also our track and field coach on the track. So a lot of it is going to take the shape of some track and field events, and that sets up there. As far as our, the windows of kind of our Circumax opportunities, certainly when we're talking about football, it's probably those 2 big windows. It's going to be right before spring football. It's going to be right before the fall season. It's not going to be like right before fall season, just in the event that when we get some heavy load, that nothing crazy happens. We might give a 2-week window there for when they're feeling it. But for the younger guys, it's a very simple method of auto-regulation and APRE style progression that they're capable of going through a set with whatever volume they feel capable of accomplishing on that day. For the veteran group, just like I said, I might have a more trust factor where they can say, okay, maybe it is just triples and we're going off of maybe like an RPE, and they say, coach, that triple was a 6 out of 10, I can go up. And if it's an athlete that I trust in that 2-3 week window, that's when they're able to push it in the weight room.
What's the value for your guys, wide range of athletes? What's the value of having performance standards, benchmarks?
First thing I think is motivational, right? Because if we have all these data points, historical data points of like what quantifies you as a talented or high performance athlete based off those metrics, it's a good carrot. But for me, personally as a coach, I look at it, it's a test for my programming. If my programming didn't yield, because we know, it's a 12-week, 3 days a week program based off this population, and the average individual based off chronological, biological age or gender, these are the results I'm expecting. I'm expecting a 3 to 5% increase in vertical displacement of power, et cetera, et cetera. If I haven't done that, I'm going to start looking at it and go, where did I shortcut? And so for me, it's also a motivator. It keeps me honest.
With athletes that I've dealt with at college and the NFL, they've been told how great they are for so long that when they actually put up against the data of what really is good, there's areas for improvement, and so it's a good humbling process for them to go through. And in that process now it becomes a teaching opportunity as a coach, because there's plenty of people out there that are going to be dream killers, and then there's a lot of people, people like me that want to be a dream builder. And so, if you're running a 5 flat 40, it doesn't really matter almost what position you play at this point. You're probably not going to make it, But when you walk in as a freshman and I say, well, here's the standard, there's no way you're going to make it. So,
kill them.
Well, now I just killed them, and I'm another person in their life telling them that they can't do something. And I know how I responded to people like that as an athlete. I mean, as soon as you didn't believe me, you were dead to me. To find what the standard is, and then what I do is I'll put it out there. Look, I'm pretty much the only person in the building that can help you reach that. If that's truly, if that's a goal of yours, you want to be in the NFL, okay, well, that means you need to do all this right, and I'm going to show you the way. I'm going to be the guy that helps you do that. And I think that all of a sudden now it puts you in a little bit different light because, I mean, I would give an evaluation to our athletes at the end of the year and asked a bunch of questions, but one of the questions was, do you feel that you're an NFL football player, And the years that I did that, I've only had one guy say no out of 105 guys every year. And he happened to be a 4th-round draft pick.
Yeah.
But the reality is that that was a dream for me, even playing NAIA college football. There's no way I was going to make the NFL. But it was still a dream, and so let them come to that conclusion on their own. You be the one that helps them build, but it's the same thing I just told my kids. We just set goals for 2017. We went to a restaurant, we set goals, and I'm like, look, shoot for the freaking moon, and if you miss, you're hitting the stars.
These guys are not weightlifters, right? These guys and girls are not strength athletes, so these numbers are giving them ideas also about where they should be or where they can fall. It's giving them ideas for goal setting. Coach, I really need to be more explosive. Okay, well, guess what? You need to be better at the Olympic movements, and this is why we focus on those. When John was talking about like the multiple rep testing too, I think that's one thing that we've kind of gotten more into because again, the athletes that, for the majority that I deal with, and even our tactical people, are not used to straining against heavy weights. So 1 rep max testing, they don't know how to strain hard enough to really get a true 1 rep max. So we get a lot more out of multiple reps that we can gauge numbers off.
What I've said as far as testing goes, it might sound like then I'm a coach that doesn't care about numbers. It's been a big talk in our profession about how you truly measure success and how you measure how successful a program has been. It's simple as this, that a program is still measured by the numbers that you accomplish. And for a high school athlete, for the people standing around this table, if we go through a program and we increase, if I ask everybody you can get a 5% increase in your bench press by next year, we'd all probably be pretty happy. That'd probably be a good training year, 5% on the bench press. Now if I took a 16-year-old student athlete that's new to lifting weights and we only accomplish a 5% increase, and that's not necessarily the value I go off of, but if we see that progression isn't happening, I'm the guy that wants to run my head into a wall because we've done something wrong. There's somewhere along the lines either we've not given enough or we've given too much. There's something there that's holding our student athletes back if that progression isn't taking place. So I absolutely care about numbers. I care about numbers for that individual, for our program. Comparatively, standards is probably looking a little bit different because like Coach Mack's saying, if I'm in that stage where there is some of those student athletes probably that would put up the best numbers in the weight room, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're our hardest workers. They're just they are those guys that are still being told how great they are, and they haven't had that taste of reality yet, and they'll get it eventually because they are the best in the room and they're going to advance in their athletic competition. But some of those things set up really well for those individuals, and not always necessarily so for some of our either younger individuals or some of the, I don't want to say less blessed, but some of those that weren't just born with crazy natural ability that have busted their butt. Setting a standard of progression and improvement has been really good to us, but necessarily comparing wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 2 isn't necessarily been the most beneficial for us.
When you go to set your goals based on these different performance metrics or benchmarks, are you setting your goals based on those standards, or kind of an outcome-based goal? Do you set process-based goals with your guys? What's your whole process? And Coach Mack, we'll start with you.
I list basically the range, the high and the low of what the combine at their position. I have where they're currently at. I have what they should be at the end of the training period, the average for the draft at their position. So that's obviously their long-term goal. We try to get to the draft average, and I figure if we can get to everybody at their position group to that average, then we're doing something great. That's top 5% of college football. Top 10% go to the combine, top 5% would be the average. And then we set a short-term goal based off that, what we think that they could hit within the training period. And then there's always that range, so that way I have a low marker that doesn't discourage our freshmen, our sophomores, when they come in and they say, that seems insurmountable. And so we produce that, and then we have a process that we have a series of questions that we ask them about their personal life to try to get to know them better, to let them know that we care about them, that we're able to draw upon in the process. But then, the biggest thing that I think that we leave doing is we create the action plan for them to do that. So I'll go through, much like you said earlier, the actual training program for that phase, and I'll point out the exercises that are going to contribute most to their deficiencies. But then I'll also ask them what they're going to commit to outside of, I call it the other 22. We have them for 2 hours of the day. They have 22 hours to mess up everything that we're going to do. So what are they going to do in the other 22 to make sure that they can accomplish their goals? And they have to come up with 3 points that are going to be an action plan of things that are going to contribute to the other 22. I personally don't like fighting a losing battle. And if they're coming to the weight room not having taken care of the other 22, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what type of training I do. And so I don't like personally. So you have to be involved with those other 22 hours and find ways to do that creatively. Through apps and through education and through peer pressure and all the things that you can find.
So how do you hold them accountable to that over a period of time?
You get those 3 bullet points, and then then I divide my staff up. We have essentially 3 groups. You got the big skill and the skill, and the strength coach that's responsible for the skill gets those 3 action points, and then their job essentially is to text 3 kids every day on the way home. Text or talk to 3 kids every day on the way home, and basically go through those lists, and ask, where are we at with this? How you doing with this? And we place a strength coach at each rack, and then we have a full-time strength coach managing the 3, and that's your linebackers and your running backs and whatever it may be. And they should be bringing those things up pretty regularly, and they have their standards, their numbers that they're trying to hit, their goals right in front of them as well. They're getting touched, whatever that rotation would be, sure, however many guys that is throughout the week. And then what happens with me is I get a list for my staff of problems, the outliers, the guys that are doing really, really good or really, really bad in something, and then those are the people that I'm calling on the way home.
For me, it stems from a point of education. I tell people all the time, I can't hold you accountable unless I know you know. That's where it falls on the coach. I want to educate you on something, and I think you've got it. It's very possible that they're just kind of in a herd, nodding their head, I get it. But if they don't understand, that falls on me as a teacher. So once I know that the individuals understand what I expect of them, what I do is I give them an opportunity for them to tell me what their expectations are. Now, I'm the coach and I can audit it and go, well, yeah, I'll give you that now, but you have to earn that and you really have to earn that. And I'm just not gonna give them the floor. But once they've earned it, then now they have a long rope. The tactical community typically, and Scott already kind of hit it, it's built on attrition, right? So if his organization, if he approached it exactly the same way that my upbringing was, he wouldn't have a team. Right. He'd have 3 guys on the roster, maybe 7 in an ideal situation. Where I live in a world of attrition, where every single one of them has to achieve that, or I'll get rid of you. And so I know you've experienced that, especially with the Colorado SWAT guys, is like that carrot. It's big and it's heavy and it can elicit a lot of stress. When you're dealing with guys where the expectation of job accomplishment is the same at 22 as is at 42, and the standard hasn't changed, it's a pretty real thing.
Obviously different setting than the academic, how do you go about holding your athletes and your fitness enthusiasts accountable?
Definitely with the team sport, it's a little bit easier because you have more interaction. They're more structured from a sport coach setting. You're more interactive with a sport coach. Like the tactical population is, like you said, it's the attrition. So from the kid standpoint and whatnot, it kind of coming to train with us is a privilege, and they earn that privilege too. And they think it's a pretty big deal to be training at the NSCA headquarters and being part of that. So it's not really that hard to kind of keep them on track with that. Like, I don't feel like we are ever having to discipline for anything.
Especially in having conversations with high school coaches here, one of the common things that sounds silly, but one of our goals is attendance. I mean, it really is. Yeah. And trying to get athletes on board in a high school where it's not, it depends on the sport coach. If the sport coach is going to be committed to the weight room, the athletes are going to be. But ultimately, except for that one, track and field, I'm not a sport coach. So it's very hard for me to mandate. I'm not going to mandate playing time. I'm not going to mandate team rules. I'm not going to mandate, accountability and responsibility for being there, and for lack of a better term, punishment if you're not. There really isn't, because it all depends on who that sport coach is. We had a really good talk earlier about those packets that we kind of go through with our sport coaches on a basically semesterly basis. Is we'll get together and we'll say, okay, that's my first kind of line of defense or offense. I go and talk to the sport coach. What do you see from an athletic perspective that ought to help Jimmy out? And we'll look at some of those things. And from a strength progression standpoint, as long as the graph looks good at the end, and there's a good progression, we're pretty happy. For us, especially in our football and hockey sports, I know a lot of high school coaches maybe tend to stay away from weight gain, and I usually watch my language from that standpoint, because that's a big deal when you're talking about weight with 14 to 18-year-old boys or girls, whichever way you want to aim them. I don't want our student athletes to walk away from campus with muscle dysmorphia where they feel they have to gain a whole bunch of weight, and I certainly don't want them to with any other sort of eating disorder. So we try to stay away from some of those things, but from a weight gain perspective, it is very important for some of our student athletes. If we're expecting a 14-year-old freshman to come in and be a starter at outside linebacker when we're playing against 4 or 5-star 18-year-old tight ends, for their safety, they might need to put 10, 15 pounds on by this time next year or something. And that'll, again, be a conversation that happens with the coach. It'll be a conversation first that happens with the parents to make sure that they're in agreement. Then we'll talk it over with the student. So attendance, weight gain, but one of the biggest things that is on that packet is the back section. That's kind of like our notes, and that's the most important thing there is character development. It might be leadership development, it might be subordinate, the ability to learn and follow.
We're doing the job that we're doing for a specific purpose and reason, and at the end of the day, from an accountability standpoint, if you're fear-based, or you're using positional, so because I'm your strength coach, you're gonna do what I say, that's the lowest form of leadership. The highest form of leadership is permission leadership, where I have your permission to lead you. And so again, through the goal setting process, through the other 22 hours, through all these things that, the daily interactions, that's where you gain the permission to be able to lead them, to be able to educate them, to be able to instead of screaming and yelling, walk over and say, hey man, didn't you tell me you want to be the best you wanted to, you wanted to go to the NFL. That wasn't my goal. That was your goal. And so I'm telling you that you have to do this, this, and this, and this to do that, and you didn't do this or this. And so is that your goal or my goal?
What I've seen a lot of times in athletics and that is that, or even in the tactical world, where people will fail and they'll scratch their head and go, how did you not succeed? Well, it's because they were in control of their failure. Mm-hmm. Like it's hard for people to relinquish that to us to go, I'm entrusting myself to you. Yep. And that's why you see a lot of people at the higher echelon of sport going, man, he was an amazing college athlete. Right. And how did he not make it to the NFL? Because he was in control of that. And like you see that a lot even with kids nowadays, because they've always been told they were great. Right. And then because our environment is not that it's certainly skill driven, but it's effort driven that teaches skill. And if they can't get past that hard work, they can't obtain those skills that is necessary to what we do is enhancement of sport, right? If we're doing it right. But we're not facilitating enhancement if they can't endure.
At some point in all of our development as young men and athletes, there was something about the weight room or a coach or a leader that really somehow ingrained that in us. I had an awesome conversation last night about guys who go into the military. That some of them are just innate in them, one way or another, to endure, basic and buds. Like that's incredible, right? And so there's just this common theme across, all the coaches here, exhibitors, vendors, that at some point or another there was a strength coach or there was an experience in a weight room that impacted them so much that it set your life, your passion, your purpose on a certain trajectory. And so it's just awesome to be a part of that and support you guys. So thank you all for what you do, and I'm sure I speak for athletes and parents across the world because it's bigger than, as awesome as it is to win national championships, make it in the NFL, have a couple big names under you, impacting somebody's life in a positive way is huge.